And we are live. So, got a little surprise today. There's a few things. So, one of the things which is quite interesting, I suppose, is that there's some news, surprise, that I don't know if you're in actually, Carl. I think you need to join the studio, by the way. Stage. There you go. You're now on as well. I tell you, we're just a dab hand at this by now, aren't we?
Hello.
And people ask us why we're phasing, but it is a great thing. Why do you phase things in slowly? Well, because you can manage half decent things if you keep it simple at the beginning. But yes, there's a few things, but basically there was a piece of news that said that private cellular is basically making a lot of things happen in IoT, etc. And of course it is, and that probably eases us very nicely into what we wanted to cover today. Obviously, last week we covered the private landy, etc. But this time we'd like to just expand it a bit more and show you some of the wonderful devices that we used to track and use AI. So we also put our own apps on Android and iOS devices with a little T for Trackergy. So we can actually see where people are going, track the strength of the images, etc. We've also got all these wonderful trackers, which we'll show you, which obviously are for the Land Rovers, but also for the EVs, which I just can't wait to launch. And that's why I am like a kid in a toy shop. But even today, also, you can see just behind me a private, a Starlink. And here I've got another Starlink that I didn't just break. But yesterday we received, so basically there are two types of Starlink. There's the sort of the dishy that we saw on how many of the vehicles do you think in the event had sort of the baby?
I think straw poll between 50 and maybe 20, 25, something like that.
Yeah, but they're not great. And if you want to put them on a vehicle, you've got to cut them open and put them in a 3D printed whatever. It's just not ideal. And they only have about 100-degree view of the sky. Whereas this massive thing, which I will show in a bit, and there's another one in the back there, has 140 degrees of the sky, much bigger panel. But they've just come out with this, which is a lot lighter, a lot nicer, and about a tenth of the cost. So we'll be putting that through its paces. And what I might do as well is, I know because I don't know if you've read the feedback that doesn't exist, but the feedback that doesn't exist says that we want more Christian. I don't know if you saw that, Carl. Did you miss that particular bit of feedback?
Funnily enough, like everybody else, I think we all missed it.
I don't know how that happened, but let's see if we can get it in there. I was going to try and see if I know, because these devices, just as well we didn't do it. I was going to try and use one of the 5G devices, but as we can see, we are in full 5G coverage here. So we'll have to do that on another event, have one on 5G, one on Wi-Fi, and we can vote for which is the better. But I suppose, we should move on to the news. What is it like? Massive market that these devices are, that private cellular is going to create. And with these, we could see exactly where each vehicle was on each day, but also we sent around the devices and they had an app on that was recording the signal strength of both the public and the private networks and showing us basically how, doesn't matter how amazing a public network is, if you put enough people on it, it will fall over. And so, slowly we saw them falling over. And ours was fine, but I don't know. That's the main of it. I was going to try and do the two together, but I've realised, I'll have to do that with a bit more planning. And it would be good to do two. We can probably do that next week from the farm, and do one over professional Starlink and the other one over budget Starlink. This is not just the news brought to you in the most wonderfully wireless way. It is what did they joke in Top Gear? It is consumer advice.
Well, the thing is, I think in the real world, I mean, you can look at tech spec sheets all you want, but ultimately in the field, you want to know what the difference is, and it's not just one scenario either. We experienced it in the RHS show at the Three Counties Showground in Malvern, and what we experienced was, Starlinks on the consumer plans or low-level business plans were getting throttled. or not working at all. And we were getting priority over that. I mean, you get what you pay for. So I do question the net neutrality of that. But at this moment in time, purely for the Starlinks, it's a good field trial.
But it's
Because
not a net neutrality thing, though, isn't it? It's what you paid for. So if you...
Well, it is, but it's starting to impinge on the principles of...
Yes. But that's just like if I've paid for the business broadband. Or
well, it's like 4 and 5G, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. I take your point entirely. But and I think the point I was going to make is the things will always fail when you need them, and you need them because you're using them.
Yeah.
Because if you weren't using them and they failed, you wouldn't notice. So if you're in the field, I mean, and I think this will become a running theme for us, Christian, that throughout the summer we'll be doing these trials and tests, and even if it's just 5 minutes here and 5 minutes there, a little video clip of us running them in different scenarios and watching them succeed, fall over, the good, the bad, the ugly, including ours as well. And therefore, I think it's important to show the world. But of course, it will change because Elon's launching, new satellites every day. Almost, it feels like, not quite, of course, but
it is. I mean,
that
6 or 7 times. I think we covered this in another event, didn't we?
We did.
Cambridge Wireless, but 6 or 7 times, to remind people, 6 or 7 times the amount of satellites have been launched in the last 10 years. So 6,000 to 7,000 versus the 1,000 in the entire history, which is it's quite a lot. But and a lot of these are obviously the low Earth orbit satellites that we're using, which obviously have a lot lower latency and are just a lot better at serving services like ours. But I think it is quite clear as well that we did have, and that's why I was wanting to do the comparison. We did have a much better service with the business high performance Starlink, not only because it is physically bigger and has a wider view of the sky, but also because we were paying a premium. And I think that's the thing. Obviously, one of the things that I'm trying to do with this, obviously, is when we're paying a premium and going to an event, we'll stick one of those on. But from what I've seen, and obviously this product is brand new, this other Starlink that we've got here that I'll show you that I made earlier is it's been in the US, I think, only for a little bit now, and it's literally come to Europe. I think this is one of the first ones that you could get. But it does seem to be a lot bigger. And the tests that I've seen, somebody published them, a chap called Oleg in Ukraine, of all places, has published getting 300 or 400 megabits a second download, which usually was the reserve of the high performance. So it'd be interesting to see. It is obviously physically a lot bigger than the old Dishy. And thank God they've got rid of the silly name Dishy. And I think the access point was called Stinky. It's just it's growing up, and there are, from consumer advice, there are other satellite services available, which we will start doing at some point. But somebody did ask us the other day why we're using them, and it's because literally, I ordered this one on a Monday and it arrives on a Wednesday, and that's kind of what you need when you're trying to do R&D in a hurry. So yeah, the tracking I think is fantastic. I don't think anyone's really done this. So I mean, these basically are devices that I don't know if you can hear, but it's starting to chuck it down in our wonderful. We had days of sunshine, and now we've got days of rain. But basically, yeah, I mean, these are kind of devices that we will be not only sticking in the vehicle, but on the batteries. And why we started doing Trackergy in the first place is that nobody seems to be doing a combined tracking where you can track this and one of these trackers and a vehicle and people, a mobile network, etc. So all of these mobile networks have a tracking device. Within them, obviously, a mobile network needs GPS in order to be able to receive a signal. And the router in there also has a GPS. I think in total there are more satellites in these Land Rovers, and also there are other satellites just to stop them getting stolen. So if we are going to leave them on site, we need to know where they are. But the combined information of knowing where people went, what their signal strength was, and even where they went in the event is pretty impressive information, and we'll be processing that and sharing that information shortly. Along with other events, we're just going to be doing within the One Word group. We will be doing it within the other areas as well and the other events. yeah, and it's going to be quite exciting. And I was just remembering, it is actually about a year since we launched, sort of properly launched a demo of it. I think we launched it in November of the previous year, but we did the demo driving to the MVNO Congress in Amsterdam via a little detour of the 79th D-Day celebration. This year is going to be, I think next week, there is obviously the 80th that we should try and get down for. I don't know if we will manage, and drive Land Rovers across the beach again. With when
I think
under
might
our
be awake this year.
When we allege that the French police will be having their lunch and won't care, we'll say it is the 5G, le G5, and they will say no G5 panky on my beaches. But we will have to get back there. But yeah, nearly the event. There's only probably 1,000 people go to that event, and they almost brought down our. Admittedly, we put it on the smallest AWS instance, the T2 or whatever it is, micro instance. But there was about 10 to 100,000 people looking at that all of the time. I don't know how 1,000 people managed to create that, but it almost brought it down. But it shows the amount of interest in these things, and so you can imagine the double interest of seeing where we've placed a network versus the public networks, and where people are actually using this, and the signal strength that they're getting, both, on the sort of the previous day when everything's hunky dory, and as I think the IT guys were saying that people who couldn't get on the Wi-Fi were saying, "Don't worry, I'm hotspotting." It's like, yeah, you wait until Saturday and Sunday when the network goes down. And of course, when that happened, we were being asked to fill loads of spaces. So I don't know if that covers our little trackers. We also have some little sacrificial trackers because people are weird and they try to remove trackers. Even if, so one of the use cases is obviously, taxi companies just use one of these, which was never really designed to work. The tracking on it is only used as a second face. I don't know. So at best, a very consumer level service, and taxi companies around the world are using it as a primary service. But also we've all tried to order an Uber and it's been going around in circles, and you're going, where are you? And the reality is that obviously people need to take comfort breaks, buy a sandwich, etc., etc. And just the simple thing you can do of basically having one of these in the vehicle. These are just simple ones that plug into the ODB port. You can see, Johnny separated from the car next to a Tesco Metro. He's obviously gone to buy a sandwich. This taxi may be another 3 minutes late. It's not hard. It's not difficult. But and then other things that I find absolutely shocking when we're looking at the e-cargo bikes for micro deliveries. One of the obsessions with these e-cargo bikes is that obviously we can get to places quicker. So boring, fantastic stats coming, but most vans, and I can't remember what the numbers are, but we'll do this in another one. But most vans spend something ridiculous, like 9 minutes for every drop-off, looking for somewhere to park to do a drop-off. And then that person probably has to park, a good decent amount of way and leave the van and go and do the delivery. And companies, you may not be surprised, in the gig economy, are trying to minimize the amount of time that they do that, and calculate and basically going and saying, when you do this drop off, you can only do 2 minutes to go to there. And it's like, well, because I'm driving this massive van, I've had to go 5 minutes over there. So long story short, you can actually start not only managing the real time that it takes someone to walk, but actually getting a proper map of how long it takes people to walk in different areas, because the amount of time that you have to park a van to go somewhere in one part of London will change from another part of London and from another city, etc. I need some more of this double espresso. So in other news, Carl, there was
well, a big one for me. I mean, I know I'm ex-Vodafone, so a little bit of a look back and a nod to my old business, but they've had the Spanish exit approved by the regulator, which is becoming a trend, really. I mean, their share price is in is in the doldrums, for want of a better phrase. They've initiated a buyback. I think €5 billion is the takeout price, 2 of which will go in a share buyback to try and prop up their share price, which is now 76p. I think when I was looking at it earlier, took a little bit of a bump on the news yesterday. But frankly, it's they've exited France, took a chunk of money for that. They've exited Spain. The big markets in Europe, certainly Western Europe, are obviously then Germany and Italy. Germany being the primary market where they're still there, but the UK, they're going to merge, and at some point, Vodafone really needs to think about what it's doing, because is it going to be this global player or not? And I suggest it'll have a strategy ex Europe, where Europe becomes a little bit more utility, because Vodafone's just not geared to be in a low cost market. It really isn't.
And I think a lot of it's legacy as well, isn't it? I mean, they started this. I remember when I was back 2 decades ago in Analysis Mason, we were doing the bid for one of the network operators. When people came and asked, we want to buy a 3G license, the first people who wanted to be an MVNO. And we said, I don't think you want to do that, because the bidding is at very high figures already. So I think when the 3G licenses came out, people were expecting them to go for somewhere between tens of millions, possibly hundreds of millions, and they went for
tens of billions.
No, well, they went for $1 billion. I think it was the worst 2 countries was Germany and.
Aggregated across the piece, but they went for a lot of money, and they're now turning the networks off. I mean, they had to be in the game at the time,
but the reason that they, my young daughter's obsessed with her vintage parcel, and obviously we all have our own things that are important to us, but that flurry of buying companies across Europe was fueled by the fact that the amount of money they paid in Germany and Britain, was so much that they would never actually make any money unless they bought a lot of operations in places like the Czech Republic and split across all of them. And that was back then. And so obviously these networks are now being depreciated, or probably never actually made a return. There are newer networks, 4G's come along, and now 5G needs building out. Yeah, it's sort of brings us full circle, doesn't it, to why small cells are so important.
It does, and this whole digital transformation, particularly on the data side, that Vodafone's undergoing, but it's been going now 2-3 years. They created this huge data lake with their partner, etc., but I don't see any results from it, and that the proof. It's great. It's a great case study, and in all the business schools, it'll be a fantastic case study to go and see what you can and can't do. But ultimately, you got to make some money. But anyway.
And it's. I mean, I don't envy anybody doing the business models now. It's actually a lot easier. It brings us quite nicely onto what we're doing in the travel space, because the business models that we're doing for the travel sims obviously is in an amount of ARPU a month, because people do spend money still on travel. So you are looking at an average ARPU of $10 to $20 a month easily, and that's in general sectors. If you get to more expensive markets like the US, more expensive sectors like the business traveler, you're looking at much higher amounts without the investment. But I mean, can you imagine trying to do a business model for a 5G network now? Well, I do. The last one I worked on was in Mexico on what was then called Red Compartida and has now become Altan. And guess what? It had to be bought by the government. Because it's just very hard, and that was that was hampered because it had to be wholesale only, I suppose. But it's 6 and 2 squares, whether that's a hamper or a benefit. And it was hampered also because of politics. The platform that they had is about as flexible as something that's not very flexible. But yeah, I mean, it would be very difficult, I think, and this is why you're seeing so many MVNOs now differentiating, going into the travel sim space and going into IoT, because there are going to be more sims in more places. if you've got a business model on top of it, if you're using a legacy business model where you're paying for capex and opex based on the amount of subs, and to get the same ARPU, you need to give out 5 SIMs instead of 1 SIM. I mean, it's there's a lot needs changing in the mobile world, and
that model will change. You're absolutely right. With IoT ARPUs or average revenue per user, it's not sustainable. And I think the days of I don't care what you use, as long as it's very low and it's £1, £2, or $1, or $2 or $3 for a SIM a month. Those have gone as well. You'll get more holistic commercials on that. Would be my view.
Well, that's why we are seeing as well, aren't we, the move to revenue shares, which I think is a lot fairer. So obviously, we've both worked with MVNOs that kind of pushed this, and their aggression probably pushed this model with the MNOs. Yeah. And it's one that was looked at the beginning, but I think it is a fairer one. Obviously, everybody was obsessed at the beginning of being full, and we're now going full circle again, where people go, it doesn't actually matter whether you're full or light. It doesn't really matter who owns. Ultimately, it's about owning the customer. And in that sense, I think the example that I've always used is like this company, Apple. If Apple didn't even own a SIM card or know who the customer was, but one thing I can tell you, if, for example, O2 in the UK, who was the first operator with the iPhone, and Vodafone in Portugal, for example, was the first operator in Portugal with the iPhone, if they lost the iPhone exclusivity, how many customers, SIM card or not SIM card, full network or not network, Open RAN network, Ericsson network, HIC on a stick network, how many of those would be left? That many. And we just really need to kind of shift. And I think that's what we saw in the events as well. People really didn't care who owned the SIM, where the network was coming from. We had, and quite rightly, I mean, it's quite complicated what we're doing, but those people didn't know whether, their network was Starlink, their network was one of the networks. They didn't know if it was OneWord. They didn't know if it was Worcester Council, whether it was Virtues or whether it was Telet. And they didn't really care. And you tell them, well, you can use a UE and go over 5G proper, or you can use a CPE and go over Wi-Fi. It's like, which is quickest and which works? I think you did a sale now with one of the guys. You put the UE in because it was quicker, and you made a massive sale, 15 quid sale straight after, which is kind of what.
Well, it's equivalent to what he lost on the previous day with no connectivity. But I can't claim all of the credit for that, though I'd love to.
Yes. Well, I'm glad to hear, but
we just need more Christian, I think, is what they were telling me.
Well, definitely we need two of them. I mean, not that I submitted that non-existent feedback, but to be fair, actually, the second one was actually going to be focused on the Starlinks, but we've got like one here and one in the back, and another one here just off camera, because they were stars. I think we have Starlink as a backup. The reality is that we try and use fiber or 60 gigahertz point to point to get the fiber, but it's not always possible. I mean, even though it's physically there was space for us to go and get fiber and run it. It's just that there are all sorts of questions as to whether you may bring down or hamper the other network. There's all the health and safety of getting things together, and I think ultimately it's just the speed to get up and running is just a lot quicker if you don't have to go and plug into something, and that's why mobile took off, right? And Wi-Fi took off. The speed to go and buy a coffee and sit on a table and be connected versus do I get the cable in? Is my cable in right? Have I got enough space? Can I move over? Applies to everything, right?
I think so. I think one thing running through my head, and it's a little bit on the fly, but so forgive me for this, but I think one of the sessions, our next trial, which is much bigger in scope, is 12th of June, so that weekend, and those following few days. The same location.
Well, the one that we know of, we may be deployed before then, but...
okay. would be the same location, but on a bigger scale. I using the full width, full footprint of the showground, and we will be expanding in terms of who we are connecting. It's still not home to the general public, so obviously still a private 5G network, but the number of devices being enabled, and the different segments from VIPs, traders, etc., will be of a different order of magnitude. So I think there's a session for us to do that as well. We're still doing the planning, of course, so it's probably a bit too early yet. But there will probably be a session towards the 3rd or the 4th week of June, for us to review what we did and what the step changes and the adjustments that we made, to be able to scale, I guess, the vehicles, the connectivity, and everything that goes with that on the private 5G network. And
it's going to be exciting.
It's very exciting because we'll have issues with the usual snags which you get in the field, and how we overcome those with the different Starlinks that we've got, different types of vehicle. We'll have a new type of vehicle, which there'll be some very very sexy, in the quote unquote words, pictures of coming forward, and we'll see them in the field, which I think the e-cargo bikes that we'll be deploying, but they're not, to warn you, they're not the e-cargo bike designs that you're probably used to. Probably more of a quad bike design, but that's just as
they're just much better, to be honest.
Exactly. And we'll go through what they look like. So I think I'm quite looking forward to that session. We may do maybe when we get to the planning stage, if this is what we're planning to do and this is what we've done. But the problem with this is what we're planning to do, as soon as that has contact with the organisers, those plans tend to change, and they're not necessarily of our own making or the constraints of the technology. So we need to be a little bit mindful of that.
But I think that's the key, right? I mean, whenever I've been involved in a big rollout, the biggest problems we've seen, and we've all seen it, whether it's an MVNO, whether it's a turnkey network, or even when we're rolling out satellite across sub-Saharan Africa, the reality is always different.
Yeah, it is.
The problem is people generally are used to, in a big network operator, going, we rolled out, you do the plan, and it's so we need 17,000 masts across these sites in this area, of which 10,000 don't meet the obligations. But guess what? They've been set in cement. They've got the backhaul in. Then they're not moving, and this is the key, and this is why the AI and what we're doing. This is the AI. It's my it's not time for mine. You'll be very relieved to know. But the moving nature of how small cells can just up and move is fantastic. It really is. And so yeah, looking forward to it. And this has been perfectly timed. I found out a double espresso is perfect timing for a wireless Wednesday afternoon.
You're in a drive-through, really, aren't you?
And yeah, it is. I tell you what, I feel like I now need to go and plug something into shore power, because it has rained so much in the last few days in London. But anyway, on that note, next week probably in the barn.
That'd be good to do it in the barn.
Might do good. We'll have to. I don't know if we do it mute. No. Contain myself.
Let's walk before we can run. Let's try and get stuff set up so we can get in there and start building stuff.
Yes.
But we'll keep you all updated. And that's
until next week. That's it.
Yeah. Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.